Hello, humans. Do not be concerned by my blue hands. I come in peace. So, today I wanted to talk about game jams because Ludum Dare 50 is coming up. I've never done a Ludum Dare myself. I've only recently done my first game jam, GM48, and I found it a really good experience, especially after doing such a long project and continuously working on that project all the time. And I thought I'd say a bit about why game jams are really good for, first of all, first time developers, people who haven't really given development a good go yet and have only maybe made something small and want to try something a bit bigger and really finish a game. Or people who have been working on projects for a really long time. You might think, oh no, I have to work on my main project, but actually sometimes it's really important to give yourself a break and to work on something different. So I have this video in chapters so you can jump to whichever part is relevant to you. I'm going to start on why it's good if you have a long project. So with long projects, often you're in the prototyping stage for a really long time, especially depending on your genre. So I'm working on basically a sort of JRPG with a battle tactics system, which is taking me a very long time to prototype and make a demo of. And it's one of those things where sometimes you just pick a genre where it's going to take you forever to prototype that game and you won't be able to get feedback on it because you don't have a working thing in the hands of people because the programming is taking so long. The good thing about game jams is you can try something with much smaller scope and then you can get feedback pretty much immediately on that. And you'd be surprised how that can apply to your own project. So I made a platformer for the game jam, but someone actually brought up that they would like to see not just WASD controls, but the arrow keys controls. Now, personally, I never use arrow keys when I'm playing games, so it's not something that I would have personally thought of on my own. And of course, that might have come up later in prototyping, but it's something that's really easy for me to add now. And I'm sure that if you have a long project and you do a game jam, you might find there's a lot of things like that that you can actually add to your larger project from finding those feedbacks in your small project. Another reason why game jams are great if you have a long-term project is it allows you to practice scope on a much smaller scale. Sometimes if you're working on a long project for so long, you kind of get out of the scope world. You start to think, oh, well, no, I'm just doing this day by day and whatever I get done, I get done. But planning is actually really important in game development. We need to plan, otherwise we don't have an idea of when our projects are going to get done and we don't keep to our deadlines. Now, I always think you should add a couple of months, a couple of days, a couple of extra bits onto whatever time you guesstimate, because the natural thing is you're not going to know what comes up with a larger project. But with a small project, you have to plan out for those things in that window of time that you have. So maybe if you think, okay, well, I'm going to spend this amount of time on development and this amount of time on art, you have to account for a little bit of time for bug fixing, which I personally probably didn't account for enough time and I wasn't too arsed with my bugs, right, for my game jam. But you can actually end up with a really polished game for a game jam if you put the time away for that, or you can end up with a really good prototype that might be a little bit buggy but probably has some nice features that are really well put together. Another really nice thing about game jams is that they open up ideas for future projects. I know when you're working on a project, you can never think of any other project. Don't let yourself start another project, that's the rule, but you can never let yourself think of another project. But sometimes it's good to have ideas in mind for what you might like to develop for future. Maybe you're someone who develops a new game every few months and you need a constant influx of ideas. Your game jams can be like your little library of like, what did people enjoy? What did people not? You might find that you have a mechanic where people really enjoy it, and maybe you should push that a little bit further and make a full game out of it. One of the indie games I loved last year, Inscription, actually originated from a Ludum Dare game, which I found really interesting once I found that out. It made me think, oh, so game jams can be the basis for a foundation of a full game. While making games for game jams is a big part of the process, playing games is something I also find a big part of the process as well. Because it's not often that you get to see other people's prototypes and other people's smaller projects. I really like how playing other people's games inspires you to think more openly about the theme of the game jam and also the mechanics. So sometimes you'll see something and it will be really simple, but at the same time really smart. And you'll think, oh, why didn't I think of that? But no, really, you'll think But really, no, you'll start thinking about how can I push mechanics when I start creating mechanics, and how can I make my mechanics more interesting and abstract? Because originality is an interesting thing to have. As much as every game now can be described by a mixture of two games, it's really nice to have some kind of unique game. Like recently, I've been playing Baba Is You, and I love the wild puzzle mechanics in there. It feels like nothing I've ever touched before. And you find a lot of stuff like that in game jams as well, I find. Another great thing about playing other people's games is it helps you with critical thinking. So I think sometimes we're too soft on our own games and too hard on our own games all at the same time. And thinking critically about other people's games really helps you to think critically about your own game as well. It helps you to look at your own game straight in the eyes and think, okay, well, actually, is that thing that I thought was really cute suitable to the theme of my game? Sometimes we add things that we like to our games, but they're not always for our games. They're for us, really. But critiquing on other people's games, and more importantly, reading other people's critiques of games, and your own game, of course, really helps you to start thinking more critically about games as a form of art and media, essentially. Another thing that's really nice, and you don't really often get to see this outside of game jams, is you get to see pure scope of what a solo dev can do versus what a team can do, which as a solo dev myself often is like something that, I struggle with, thinking of, oh, what can I do personally versus what can a team do? Because obviously a team has more people and they can achieve a much larger game. But I have to skim around the edges on certain things, like maybe I don't have as beautiful animations, or, maybe my art is lower resolution. So you can really see the difference of what a team can do versus what a solo dev can do in a game jam. And I think that's really nice for teaching us about maybe the scope we should be giving ourselves as solo dev, or maybe how hard we should be pushing ourselves as teams, depending on what you're doing. Don't push yourself too hard, teams. Game jams are also really good if you're just starting out development. So they're not just for people who've been developing games for years. If anything, I would say game jams will benefit you probably even more if you're just starting out and you're kind of learning your engine. So the first thing that I'm going to say about game jams being good for beginners is that obviously, as I've just said, it helps you learn your engine. Whatever engine you're using, it helps you to learn it. It lets you play around with different engines if you're doing a few different game jams. So you can figure out what engine you like and maybe what you want to do a larger project in. And it gives you just a general feel for the flow and process of game development within that engine. Because a lot of the time we'll make half-baked games and it won't really turn out to be a finished game. It's not really playable. We can't show other people that game. But the good thing about game jams is it kind of forces you to think small, think within your scope. So if you're just starting out, maybe something that has a nice tutorial on it might help. You could throw in a little twist mechanic into that tutorial. But keeping it really simple is a great idea for your first game jam, and especially if you haven't really done much game development before. The next good thing is if you're a solo dev, which you probably are if you're only starting out, it forces you to get involved in all aspects of game development. So you're going to be doing the art, you're going to be doing the programming, and you're going to be doing the music, depending on the game jam. A lot of them require you to make your own art and music as well as program. But the great thing about this is someday if you do go on to work with a team, or if you continue working as a solo dev, the good thing is the role of each person and you get a little bit of experience with that. Even if you make the worst music ever, which is what I do, I'm still practicing, you end up learning a bit more along the way, and you also learn the scope of like how long it takes you to do something. So maybe you might think, oh, I'll spend this much time on programming and this much time on art and this much time on sound, and maybe in the end you don't really have a full song or proper art for your game, but you finish the game with prototype art and sort of a song, so that's okay. But next time, next game jam, you'll know the scope for how long it takes you to do a song. So it gives you that kind of planning ability as well for a game. Learning to scope early on into game development is probably a really good thing. I personally didn't learn to scope early on into game development, and I feel like I'm only kind of getting around to that now. I'm still roughly hitting my goals with things. I said I wanted to have a demo by the start of this year, But to be honest, I only started development on this game in like November 2020. So I think I was slightly ambitious. But now that I know kind of the scope of my game and I know the scope in general of how fast I can work, I think that adds a lot to my game development. I think if you figure that out early on via game jams, I think that's like you've got a cheat sheet right there. You know exactly how much you can make in how little time. So you can think, okay, well, this game will probably take me 3 months to make, and then always, add a little bit of time onto that because bugs. But let's say you have a nice prototype built out of the game jam, and you're like, I want to build on this. You already have the basis of your game made. You just need to clean up the code a little bit, and maybe the art, and maybe the music, and maybe polish it up a good bit. Another reason why it's great is it's so hard to get feedback on your game early on into game development. That's why I would say it's a good thing to go for small game jams as well as big ones, obviously. But Ludum Dare is quite a large game jam, so there's a lot of people involved and making games. So I don't really expect to get much feedback on my game personally. But I'm kind of going to be there for the process of it, for the fun of it, for the experience of making another game. But there's a lot of smaller game jams out there. The game jam that I participated in, GM48, which is just for Game Maker, it only had like, I think about 30 entries. But the good thing about that was I got a lot of feedback on my game. I was able to use that feedback to think back to my larger projects and other things I might be doing in the future. And also to scope myself a bit better, because I learned that I actually had a lot of time by the end of the game jam that I probably could have spent more time on expanding the level, making it a bit bigger, because I essentially had a 1 level game, which was kind of pathetic considering some people had like some RNG and some wild stuff going on. They had like randomly generated levels and all that stuff. So yeah, I think I'll scope myself a bit better next time. But you should definitely keep that in mind when you're doing your own game jam. Don't mind about your scope on your first game jam. That's your lesson. That's how you learn to scope. As a first-time developer as well, something great about playing the games in the game jam is it gives you great ideas on how to actually use your engine. So many people like use engines in such a smart way. Like when people make 3D games in Game Maker, it blows my mind because like I'm not going to make things difficult for myself. I make 2D games, but the truth of it is that people can do wild things that you wouldn't expect with different engines that you wouldn't think they could. But also it gives you more of an idea of maybe what engine you might like to use in future. So let's say you're into 3D stuff, but you're currently using Game Maker. Probably not the best for 3D. So you might figure out that maybe you're better off using something like Unity or Godot or something else. And if the developers of each game are nice enough to say what engine they use, then you'll be able to think, oh, maybe that looks like a really good engine if I could build something like that now. Another great thing about game jams, if you're early on in development, is feedback on your game and other people's games really tells you more about what people want in genres. So you might not have much of an idea of what genre you want to do yet, but you can see all the different things that people really like in different genres. So you might not create the game of your dreams, and thus you won't be able to get feedback on the game of your dreams, obviously. Probably not in 48 hours, but maybe someone else has created something similar to that. And maybe their feedback might teach you what people love and hate in that genre. I think the best thing about game jams, though, for people early on in their game development journey is that it really shows you what people can do. Even I'm still like amazed at what people can do in 48 hours. Like looking at some of these games, like the art, everything is so beautiful. I have to stop myself from like staring at team games and being like, I could do that because I'm in. I know it can't. But maybe I could do it in a week instead of in 2 days, And it's really incredible what people can do with such a small amount of time. And it shows that if you just build up an abundance of skills, then you'll be able to do that as well yourself. I hope this video was helpful. I know it's a little bit different from my usual devlogs. I thought I'd kind of do something a bit different and kind of switch it up here and there. But if you enjoyed this video, then let me know and comment and like and let me know if I should do more videos like this, and I will make videos like this then. So thanks for watching, and have a good life, my alien friends.